Manner 24/7, 365 or 366 days a year. And for once, I'm on time. This is History Hefner, bringing you some amicable neighborly history for the next hour or so, where this is our live stream lecture that we do every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Following up from our live stream Q&As, Ask Me Anythings, which are two-parters, Fridays and Saturdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we will be streaming on some other services very, very soon, where I'll be streaming some history, where I talk about different historical topics, while probably doing some gaming. So maybe we're headed to Twitch, Discord, Facebook, or X, something like that. So good to see everybody. Viking Empire. Um, yeah. And Mohammed, great to see you as well. It's always nice to have friendly neighborhood historians here. To become a friendly neighborhood historian, all you have to do is like and subscribe and support this channel. Like I said, we have our live stream lectures every Sunday at 4, Q&As Fridays and Saturdays at 6, and we have long-form content dropping every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Go check out my most recent videos there, and one coming tomorrow. And I just uploaded one, a special one for today, all about Father's Day, its history, and the tragedy that actually helped us create the modern holiday of Father's Day. So go check that out. A very happy Father's Day to everybody. I hope you're all celebrating your dads, enjoying your dads. Those of you who are dads, thank you for all your sacrifices and hard work in the world of parenting and in the world of work and all the other great stuff that you do. We celebrated Mother's Day here. We did a live stream lecture that day where I talked about its history. So I wanted to give a shout out to the fathers before we go into our live stream lecture for today. Our topic is going to be the rise of the Middle East and an assessment and I will be ascertaining the problems in the Middle East, where they come from, and where their origins actually spiral from. So we will be talking about that for the next hour or so. If we have any time left over at the end, we'll be doing a Q&A, Ask Me Anything. Let me see here.
Okay. Finally, I turned off I think my headphone was coming in. Hopefully you can hear me better. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we bring you history in a friendly, neighborly manner. Happy Father's Day to everybody. And this is our live stream lecture. We do it every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Fridays and Saturdays, we have our live stream, our Q&As, Ask Me Anythings. And then Mondays and Fridays, 8 p.m. Eastern, we have videos. We just dropped a long-form video for Father's Day. So fathers, go check it out and enjoy. Yes, thank you. I'm glad. I was accidentally connected to my AirPods, and so that's why it was cutting out and probably sounded like I was underwater, and I know it's done that before. So um, yeah, so like and subscribe, become a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as that. And today's topic is the history of the Middle East, how the Middle East was created in its modern form, and what are some of the root causes behind the various tensions in the Middle East, its cultural, ethnic tensions, and things like that. I want to do this in a very fair, objective, and balanced way, as all historians do. Our job is to tell the truth. So please hold me accountable in the chat. I won't be interacting with it as much as I normally do, but I will be looking back at it at the end and making sure I did a good job. Hopefully it's a decent enough job. And I also have moderators to help us out there when they show up, Harry and Hars maybe. But yeah, so if we have time at the end, I may be answering questions related to history, social studies, and the like. Thank you for watching my Crusader video. I appreciate that, Mohammed. But yes, becoming a friendly neighborhood historian includes liking and subscribing. If you want to help this channel grow, you can consider joining and becoming a member. There'll be special bonuses and perks for you, including early access and stuff like that. But also there is, you could also give a donation, a perk, a comment, something like that. Anything you do helps the channel grow, so I really appreciate that. So the Middle East, the modern Middle East as we know it, with the countries such as Iraq and Syria and Iran, obviously has been a hotbed of human activity for the last 6,000 years. The earliest historical societies, civilizations, most of them existed in the Fertile Crescent, the area around the Tigris and Euphrates River, that includes Sumer, the Paleo-Babylonian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the Achaemenid Persians, the Medo-Persians, as they're also known. The various different empires in that land existed in Persia and Iraq and Syria that dominated a huge portion of the Middle East, while the Arabian Peninsula maintained a level of independence, not really being able to be fully integrated or conquered by empires like the Greeks or the Romans. Nabatea, as it was called, was always a pretty independent source. Nobody could really hold on to it. And there was a plethora of different religious activities and behaviors and cultural developments going on in the Middle East throughout much of its early history. But people did not call it the Middle East until relatively recently. It was originally called the Ancient Near East. and that's what we kind of refer to it now. So the ancient Near East includes an area like the Levant, which includes Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, and Palestine. There's the Arabian Peninsula, which would include Arabia and also Somalia, Yemen, things like that. And then in the north, there's Iraq, Syria. Turkey isn't always considered part of the Middle East. It's kind of a give or take. And that also includes the Transcaucasus region, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, who have all had a part to play in the development of the Middle East, both in the past and in modern times. The Middle East could also extend into Iran. The Persian empires that I mentioned before are all centered in modern Iran. Egypt is considered the farthest African extent of the Middle East, as most of North Africa, despite sharing many cultural and religious historical facts with the rest of the Middle East, Egypt is considered kind of the tail end of the Middle East because of the Sinai Peninsula and its important dominance to Egyptian culture and history, and the Nile River is kind of seen as a boundary between North Africa and the rest of Africa and the Middle East. So you've got Persia on the outskirts, you've got Egypt on the outskirts. A lot of people would consider certain areas like Afghanistan and Pakistan to be Middle Eastern, but that's more Central or South Asia. And yes, we did just start. So yeah. But basically, there's different. So that's kind of what the Middle East is comprised of. Those different places that were part of North Africa or the Near East or the Arabian Peninsula. And the most unifying factor for all of these different areas is the religion of Islam, which has become the most dominant religion in the Middle East. Islam originally started in the 7th century and came out of the Arabian Peninsula with a vengeance, destroying the Sassanid Persian Empire. They also were able to take a large amount of land from the Byzantine Empire, which was eventually swallowed up and conquered by the Ottomans, a Muslim empire that originally came from Turkey in the early 14th century. The Turks eventually became the dominant force in the Middle East, with the Ottoman Turks capturing the two Muslim holy cities of Mecca and Medina, or Yathrib, in the Arabian Peninsula, basically establishing themselves as the Islamic Caliphate or Islamic State. And the story of the modern Middle East really begins with the Ottoman Empire. Not only had they conquered all of North Africa and the Middle East, but they conquered Greece and large sections of southeastern Europe called the Balkans. So, yeah. Basically, the Ottoman Empire rose to great heights and great power. It spread Islam everywhere it went. It created a really strong unifying force, but many of the different peoples who were not Turks chafed under them, including the Arabs, which would become relevant later. There were Christian and Jewish groups that seemed to be somewhat second-class citizens, often having to pay taxes or give their children to become soldiers, like the Janissaries. This was a problem in southeastern Europe, where Eastern Orthodox and Catholic Christians continually fought against Muslim and Ottoman aggression. The Ottoman Empire, like all empires, did what all empires did, whether it's British or Ottoman or even American, you could argue: oppression, colonialization, espionage, manipulation, extraction, exploitation of resources and native peoples. And there was always a minority that seemed to be struggling compared to the majority of the people, with the majority being the powerful Muslims, especially the Turks themselves. Other groups of Muslims of Arabic background and other Semitic backgrounds seemed to take secondary status, and behind them were the Jews, and behind them were the Christians, who basically lost a foothold on that entire land. Originally, Jerusalem had been controlled by the Romans at the time of Christ, and after that was taken over by the Byzantine or Eastern Roman Empire until the Muslims conquered it in 636 or 638, I think. Conquest of all of these former Byzantine and Persian lands brought Islam to them, either peacefully or by force or by easy conversions or things like that. And the Ottoman Empire reaped the rewards of it, with Christian minorities being significant throughout their empire in southeastern Europe, the Holy Land, and in areas of the Transcaucasus, particularly Armenia, which the Armenian population was always being, Armenia and the Transcaucasus was always being eyed by the Russian Empire in the 17 and 1800s as a place that they could conquer and take from their longtime foes, the Ottomans. The Ottomans made a lot of enemies. They made enemies with the Central Europeans, the Italians, and the Holy Roman Empire. They made enemies with the Transylvanians and the Wallachians, led by their famous prince Vlad the Impaler, or the guy who became Count Dracula in stories. The Russians were a major enemy for the Ottomans. So by the time the 1800s begin, the Ottoman Empire and its extent and glory is starting to fade. It wasn't what it once was in the 15 and 1600s, and its impact and influence is starting to wane, and many of these Christian minorities are fighting back, particularly in the Balkans. In 1832, Greece gains its full independence from the Ottomans, and throughout the rest of the 19th century, several different states in the Balkan area, like Bulgaria, which was once an empire in the Balkans, Romania, they will gain their independence and fully cut off their connections with the Ottoman Empire, although they maintain large Muslim populations today in areas like Albania, Macedonia, Kosovo, and the like. So, all while that's happening, as the Ottoman Sultan, as the power of the Ottoman Sultan is challenged more and more, the office and power becomes more bureaucratic, and their stranglehold on the Middle East starts to fall apart. They had never been able to control all of Arabia, and that had led to a series of different problems. But the works of Muhammad Ali in the late 19th century led to their collapse of their control over Egypt, and European colonization took away Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, and the rest of the Maghreb or North Africa. Despite these strong Muslim connections and historical connections to the Islamic State, the Ottomans lost a huge amount of their empire in the 19th century. With European countries breaking off and North African countries being colonized by the Europeans, the Ottoman Empire saw colonization turn against them. This led to more corruption, more calls for reform, more efforts at creating a constitutional empire rather than an absolutist or bureaucratic empire. The hierarchy was being challenged, liberal ideas were slipping in, and more nationalist resistance was coming. It had come with the Egyptians and the Greeks, and it was coming with the Arabs at the beginning of the Great War. By 1914, when the Great War begins, the Ottoman Empire was in serious, steep decline compared to the European powers. The empires of Germany, Great Britain, France, and even the Russians were superior in many ways to the Ottomans. The Ottomans believed that their power and control over the large Middle Eastern territories was slipping away, and they needed a chance to reaffirm their political power and control. With the Russians being influential in Persia and with the British being influential in Afghanistan and controlling the Indian subcontinent, and large parts of Africa, and Egypt being a British colony and protectorate, they weren't too far away from the Ottomans and from their hub of power. So the Ottomans saw joining the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians in what you call World War I, and I believe is World War II, was a chance for them to become as powerful as they possibly could and restore some of their glory and take back lands either in southeastern Europe or North Africa. The war didn't go well for the Ottoman Empire. As bad as it went for the Russians, the Germans, and the Austro-Hungarians, it might have been even worse for the Ottoman Empire, which came almost to total collapse because of it. Basically, the Europeans, the British started attacking the Ottomans through Egypt, with the French helping them. The British also tried to attack the Ottoman mainland in Turkey, in Asia Minor, that peninsula, but failed with the Gallipoli campaign, the Gallipoli offensive. It was the Dardanelles campaign. But the Greeks joined the war, once again, to take a chunk out of the Ottomans. And most importantly, the Arabs joined the war in 1916. Now, here's something really fascinating that you may or may not know. This Arab nationalist movement and the Arabic Revolution against their Ottoman Turkish oppressors, and remember, despite being Muslim, the Ottomans and the Arabs are not the same, gave birth to this flag. And you can't see all of it, but this is the flag. This is the flag with the black, white, and green with the red corner in it. That is the Palestinian flag. The Jordanian flag is based on this. Many countries in the Middle East and the Levant have a flag based off of this model, because this is the flag of the Arabic Revolution, which started in 1916 as the British loaned support and political alliance to the Arabs, using them to help destroy the Ottomans. A famous example of this was a British intelligence officer named T.E. Lawrence, who became closely associated with the Arab struggle for independence and eventually became known as Lawrence of Arabia. So that flag, although used by the Palestinians today and banned in Israel for reasons relating to the Israel-Hamas war, was actually originally used by the Arabs as a way to protest their independence against other Muslims, the Ottoman Turks. The Ottomans have been fighting with different Muslim groups, by the way, for a long time, whether it was rebels in Egypt or Saudi Arabia, like I had mentioned, or the Safavid Persians throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. So, basically, what happened next? the British used the Arabs. They did not, they gave them this idea of being able to have their own land afterwards, but really didn't mean it, so that they could help overthrow the Ottomans. Continual campaigns in that area eventually led to the collapse of Ottoman power. And by the end of the war, the Ottoman Empire was in serious decline. And much of its land had been taken away from it. It had lost all of the land that it had basically in the Balkans, and Bulgaria had taken even more land away from it. The Middle East was finally ready to be created. And it was created by the Allies, by the British and the French. And although the Americans wanted these areas to be able to determine their own leaders and their own destinies, with many different ethnic peoples involved in there, the Europeans basically decided that these people were not civilized enough. So, borrowing from my live stream lecture, which I have every Sunday, that I had last Sunday about the British Empire, the Europeans, the British and the French decided that they knew best and they would create different territories. They would carve up the Middle East like they had Africa, and these territories they would administer, govern, and provide economic and political aid to until they were ready to be ruled by a proper ruler who was decided by the Europeans. These were called mandates. So there were different areas that were carved up to be divided between the British and the French. By the way, something else had happened that was pretty important for how the Middle East is the way it is today. Despite a very long ancient connection to Christianity that is mainly because of the fact that Christianity started in the Middle East. Antioch in Syria is where the term Christian was first used, supposedly, according to the New Testament. Jesus was a Middle Easterner. Obviously, the Christian sect had dominated the Middle East for a long time, with the Byzantine Empire being a thoroughly Christian empire. Christianity has become the third wheel behind Judaism and Islam, especially in the Middle East. And the main reason for that is the ethnic cleanse. There's several reasons. I've talked about the Ottomans and their oppression of Christian minorities, but also ethnic cleansing during the Great War caused horrifying catastrophes towards Christian populations. 3 different groups were targeted for genocide during that time, for ethnic cleansing and removal. Greeks living in the Ottoman Empire, the Assyrians, which are a group of people who live in what is now Syria and Iraq, who were ancient Christian groups of different origins and ideas, and of course the Armenians. And I have an entire video about the tragedy of the Armenian genocide, which now even the Turkish government is starting to open up about. Basically, through forced relocation, oppression, violent tactics, and bullying, they forced millions of people, many of them Armenians, some of them are Syrians, and some of them Greeks, to migrate across the empire to the deserts of Syria to keep them safe. This was not their real intention. The fear was that the Armenians would help the Russians overthrow their empire during the war, that the Greeks would continually help the Allies destroy the Ottomans from the inside, and of course they didn't trust the Assyrians. These were targeted ethnic cleansings that related to their religious proclivities. They could never do this to the Arabs because the Arabs were being aided by the British, and by that time the Ottomans were already imploding. But in the early parts of the war, 1914 to 1915, the Assyrians, Armenians, and Greeks were targeted who were living in the empire, and they were forced into relocation without proper supplies, nourishment, and many of them died from exposure to the elements, as well as continual violence and attacks by the Ottomans. The Ottomans actually organized groups of fighters to go into areas and violently attack men and women and abuse women, if you know what I mean, who were involved, who refused to move. This affected the Armenians in particular, and about 1 million to 1.5 million of them died during this time. It is one of the first major genocides of the 20th century, and there are more, unfortunately, to come. So, my point being, the Ottoman Empire practiced ethnic cleansing, practiced genocide. These are some of the first examples of it on a mass scale in human history, especially in the 20th century, which is just rife with oppression and genocides and ethnic cleansing. So basically, that is a footnote, but is an important part of why there are fewer Christians in the Middle East than there were in the past. Christians converted to Islam because for the sake of political safety, to escape economic hardship and all of these things, and this happened willingly and unwillingly and through coercion, through centuries and different permutations, but systematic destruction of Christian populations was a goal of the Ottoman Empire because they believed they would turn on them and help the Europeans destroy their empire. This was a big, daunting fear for the Ottomans throughout 1914, 1915, and 1916. However, their fear in 1917 turned. The Arabic Revolution freed Palestine, no pun intended, from the Ottoman clutches, which meant that the holy cities of Islam and Jerusalem were no longer under the control with all of their cultural and historic weight of the Ottoman Empire. This is really bad news for the Ottomans, They continually are being defeated by the Romanians, or the Russians, on the Eastern Front in the Transcaucasus region, and their ethnic cleansing has made a moral campaign of what the Europeans are trying to do in destroying their empire. So the Ottomans are in serious decline and serious trouble. What happens next? So the Europeans win the war, and then they decide that the Ottoman Empire has no right to control any of the lands in the Middle East. The Ottomans will be constrained to the Turkish peninsula, Asia Minor, where they will eventually collapse and be reformed into the Turkish Republic that exists to this day thanks to the workings of a very brilliant politician and nationalist, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who does not like the original treaty that ends the war, which basically gives Bulgaria huge portions of Turkish land, and he wins back a lot of this land through the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. So the Ottoman Empire dies about that time. It is completely collapsed after the war, and the Allies then divide up Ottoman lands. The British gain mandates in Palestine, Iran, and the Arabia, while the French take Syria and Iraq and Lebanon. These areas are new states that are carved based on historical, cultural, and ethnic ties to those lands. These nations, at least not all of them, had not existed before. To one extent or another. There had been an Assyrian empire, there had been a group called the Aramaeans in ancient times, but there hadn't been really a Syria. Iran is named after the Aryan peoples, Indo-Aryans, who migrated between the Turkish steppes and all the way to South Asia and all the way to Europe. So there's a connection there. And so that's why the land of Persia and some of the other states in that area was renamed Iran. And then you have Iraq, which was taken over by the French. The French also took Syria and Lebanon. Lebanon had ancient connections to that land and had been a specifically different people that were overwhelmingly Muslim. So the French had those mandates. The British took mandates where they were controlling the political and economic affairs of Palestine and Arabia. When Palestine was freed from the Ottomans, the British Foreign Secretary, Lord Alfred Balfour, released a declaration in which he said that there should be a Jewish state in the Holy Land in Palestine. For decades now, Jewish people from Europe and other parts of the world as well had been moving slowly but surely back to Israel. Jews have been forced into migrating from the Russian Empire in large numbers due to constant persecutions, and these constant persecutions had led them to back to the Holy Land, trying to create a Jewish state, and that became Zionism. It had existed before in different forms and various ideas, but Theodor Herzl was the main promulgators of it in the late 19th century. So there was a growing Jewish population creating Jewish communities in Palestine in 1917, when the British acknowledged that the Jews had an ancestral homeland there, that they should have a country there. This is the Balfour Declaration, and all it simply said was that the Jews have a right to have a state in Palestine. It said nothing about a two-state solution, sharing the land, what that would look like, and this is going to cause a lot of problems later on. Eventually, a solution is devised by the British Mandate of Palestine to have the land that is known as Israel today belong to the Jews and be a state for the Jews, while the land of the Transjordanian region would be given to the Arabs who inhabited that area and the other Semitic peoples, which would become the state of Palestine. This was batted around and debated for a long time, but eventually a group of political family that had grown in power in Syria, the Hashemites, were able to bargain with the British and buy off Jordan, and that is how the Hashemite kingdom was created that rules Jordan to this day. So the British, then the French, didn't technically control these areas as territories, but they did have a huge amount of weight on their economic, political, and global development. And these countries were obviously tied to the hip, and the British and French would ostensibly defend them and their interests. But a huge commodity that became extraordinarily important in the creation of these modern Middle Eastern states is the redistribution of oil. Huge amounts of oil in Arabia and Israel and Iraq and Iran obviously became huge incentives for the Europeans to want to extract resources from there, trade resources, and develop further ties. British Petroleum became one of the biggest agents in Iran, creating large-scale oil rigs and mining operation, sorry, can't think right now, but basically seizing oil, taking oil from countries. But this was a huge part of the British efforts in Iran, the French efforts in Iraq. And the biggest example, and so the local areas would eventually be ruled by political strongmen, as different political families of different tribes vied for control and influence, and did what they could to buy the support and approval of the Europeans. The best way that they did this was by promising them oil rights, continual connections, the ability to access petroleum and other resources, and basically creating long-term economic partnerships and dependencies that have trickled down into modern foreign policy to this day. So the way these Middle Eastern states got created was the British and the French dividing up the Ottoman Empire after it was destroyed in the wake of the Second World War or First World War, depending on your perspective. And the way these states gained their independence was by different tribal leaders rising to extremely high positions, using money, influence, and power to basically placate of different European entities into trusting them and giving them the keys of the kingdom. The Arabs were absolutely incensed that the British did not give them their independence right away, did not that they basically broke their promise of giving them autonomy, and fights between different tribes broke out, and many people resisted British authority as the British continued to mandate the region. Eventually, the Saud family, under a man named Prince Faisal, rose to prominence, and in 1932, the British turned over the running of Arabia to the Saudi family. That is why it is Saudi Arabia. Look at a map from 100 years ago. There is no Saudi Arabia. There is Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, and Nabatea was what the Romans used to call it. Those areas were not controlled by the Saudis until 93 years ago. So at the same time, British in the late 20s became entranced by the Reza family in Iran, which eventually rose to power. No, Pahlavi family in Iran, which eventually rose to power and created a military dictatorship under the auspices of a monarchical kingdom, the Shah of Iran. There were two major Shahs, and the second one was eventually overthrown in 1979, but more on that later. Syria and Lebanon gained their independence from the French around this time as well. One of the last states to actually gain their full autonomy, although I think the Lebanese, I think it wasn't until the 60s they gained full autonomy. I'm trying to remember those two. I don't know those ones as well. Both in Syria and Iraq, as in Iran and in Saudi Arabia, the French leaving behind their control did not end economic ties, political ties, or influences, and the rise of strong tribal leaders eventually led to the rise of two of the most important dictatorships in the early 21st century. That was the Assad family in Syria, which came to power in 1971, and Saddam Hussein, who came to power in 1978 in Iraq and basically tried to control that area and increase Iraq's influence and power over areas like Iran and the rest of the Middle East for 25 years until the United States overthrew him. So the Assads come to power in Syria, the Shah and his family in Iran, Saddam Hussein in Iraq. By the mid-1970s, much of the political dictatorships and powerful authorities that will control the Middle East and their foreign policy for a long time have come to prominence in this area. Meanwhile, the next World War brings the Nazis into the fray, and the Nazis are very interested in trying to conquer as much of the Middle Eastern lands and North African lands as they can. They fight in Egypt, but eventually are defeated with the British and the Americans teaming up to send back the Desert Fox and the Nazi forces. The Italians had wanted to build an empire in Ethiopia and Libya, and Libya had been a long time Italian colony. Yet after Italy was taken over by the fascists and then defeated in that war, Libya would gain its independence, and Ethiopia would retain its independence under Haile Selassie until 1977. Libya eventually comes under the sway of another strongman. You can see a pattern emerging. As areas are decolonized, strongmen rise to the occasion, and Muammar Gaddafi becomes the dictator of Libya, a committed Muslim with a strong antithesis towards the West. Now, the West is going to continue to be a bogeyman and a devil in many ways for many of these Middle Easterners. And the politicking, the manipulation, the economic extractions, the post-colonial relations of the British, the French, and their American allies with the Middle East are going to create a lot of understandable reasons as to why there is such antipathy to the United States. But I can't go any farther without mentioning the importance of Islam. Now, I've talked about Islam in a little bit on how it's one of the main unifying ties of all of these areas. In the 19th century, a new form of Islam developed called Wahhabism. Wahhab Islam, which started in Saudi Arabia, basically believed that people turning their backs on Sharia law, turning their backs on proper commitment to the teachings of Muhammad and to the hadiths, the stories of his life and Islamic ethics and all of that, had been the number one reason why the Muslim world had come under the sway of the Ottomans, and also the Europeans continued to grow their influence. So in order to rectify and save themselves from secular empires or less than perfect Muslim empires like the Ottomans, Wahhab Islam focused on a strong recommitment to Islamic principles. This is the bedrock of radical Muslim fundamentalism that has gripped areas like Saudi Arabia and Iran since the 20th century. And the radical enforcement of stringent Sharia laws, which not only include things about social justice, toleration, giving to the poor, following the 5 pillars of Islam, but have also included things like mercy killings, acid burnings, female genital mutilation, and the like, have been part of that enforcement. This is why the burqa, the hijab, women's limited education, limited driving capacities, things that we hear about in stereotypes, which aren't always true, but have some root in reality, actually is a outgrowth of a radical application of Wahhab Islam to different areas of the Middle East. It's a reaffirmation of Muslims to the core principles of their Muslim tenets. They believe they have been punished by Allah for not submitting, which is what Islam means, to the proper tenets, and that getting back to extreme fundamentalism would be the best way to do this. This has been used by powerful people to control and manipulate the masses for a century and a half, and it has led to startling and devastating results, not just for Westerners, Christians, and Jews, but also for Muslims who are not nearly as strident or who are not the right type. Now remember, there are 2 major branches of Islam. There are others, but I'm not going to talk about them right now. The 2 majors include Sunni and Shia Islam. Sunni and Shia Islam have always been opposed to each other and have played the no true Scotsman's fallacy card, basically saying Sunni Muslims aren't real Muslims and Shia Muslims are not real Muslims. So despite the fact that Sunni Islam is the majority and one of the most dominant, Shia Islam takes bedrock in Iran, with the Shah being supposedly a direct descendant of Muhammad, which is a key cornerstone of Shia belief. And so Shia Islam has dominated Persia and Iran for 5 centuries. So that is why there is such tension, not just between the Jews and the Muslims that they are fighting in different areas, but also between Sunni Muslims and Iran. Iran continues to be a question mark, not just for Jews and Christians and Westerners, but also for the Saudis who are Sunni. So there you go. So there's just a technical definition of it. And if anyone is a Muslim in the chat, I hope I have done a service and actually explained Islam as best as I possibly can. I apologize if I have not, and I hope that I have been very fair and objective in what I am describing. I would say the same thing if I was doing a lecture on the medieval world and I wanted to talk about Catholic Christianity, or talking about the history of the Judaic kingdom and wanted to do the same with Judaism, or talking about India and Hinduism. So I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can be towards religious beliefs, and hopefully I have not shown bias and been objective. So if you've appreciated that, please like and subscribe, and consider joining or donating to help the channel grow. So was a slight over-exaggeration. Well, that's the problem, Mohammed. There's a slight over-exaggeration in the application of Wahhab Islam in these modern sectors. A lot of people think that this is just what Islam has always been, and I think a lot of people don't understand that Wahhab Islam has been taken and ran with to create more radical fundamentalist forms of Islam that have led to mercy killings, acid burnings, and all the other stuff I was talking about that really is not at the core tenets of many Islamic people. And hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world would suffer under those consequences if they were in those situations, because they're not Muslim enough, or find them absolutely abhorrent. So, yes. Thank you, Texas. I really appreciate it. I do my best. So hopefully, Muhammad, I have been fair to Islam, to the Prophet, and to all of that. But anyways, moving forward. And I've been objective. I've criticized radical Islam, and I've also shown how it's not all Muslims, because it's not. I mean, that's absurd. That's like saying, yeah, well, I'm not going to do parallels right now. But let me get back to the story. So more radical forms of Islam become more and more popular in areas like Saudi Arabia and Iran, and Sharia law becomes used to become more of a, thank you, Muhammad, I appreciate that, as a way to enact more control and political oppression. Whether these tenets are actually believed or they are used by clerics to assert their power and dominance is another debate for another time. Moving forward. The next World War brings what I was talking about with Egypt and the Nazis and the Italians trying to build an empire and being kicked out of Ethiopia and Libya, eventually with the help of the British and the French. The continual wars caused by the Europeans that lead to the suffering and deaths of tens of millions of people cause the colonial worlds and the mandated worlds and the protectorate worlds of the Middle East, Africa, and Asia to rebel and basically say the Europeans have no moral ground for saying that they are more civilized and will continue to control us. We want our independence. Give us our full autonomy now. And that's what the British and the French do in the Middle East. The British control, I believe they control Somalia and Yemen for quite some time and then eventually give those up as like direct colonies. Egypt gains its independence in the early 50s and they are immediately taken over by an extremely important figure, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who forms a military dictatorship, a military regime that has continually dominated Egyptian politics for 75 years. And Nasser is very interested in uniting all of the Arabic peoples together under an Islamic banner, creating kind of a communitarian Islamic world that will stand up against the West. Meanwhile, the Cold War starts, and the Cold War draws the United States and the Soviets into two things. The US trying to stop communism wherever they can, basically throwing any and all options to replace it, whether that be liberal democracy, capitalism, or military dictatorships. As long as you're not a communist, you're fine, which is why someone like Francisco Franco can stay in power despite oppressing the Spanish people. It's also why Nasser is in power. He's not a communist, but he has some sympathies to socialist policies, but he's not a full-blown communist because he doesn't, and this is a case with many Muslims, there are some sympathies to leftward ideas rising in the mid-20th century in the Muslim world and in the Middle East in particular. And what it comes down to is war making strange bedfellows. Radical Muslims and communists hate the West, hate democracy, hate capitalism, and hate Christianity, generally speaking. So there's a lot of commonalities to be shared. This doesn't mean that they automatically embrace Islam. And if you want to hear me talk more about what happens in Egypt to show the demise of Western Europe and Western European empires, go and check out my live stream lecture from last week. But basically, the Soviet Union does what it can to influence agitators and leftward movements in the Middle East, in Iran, in Syria, in Iraq, and in Egypt. Meanwhile, the U.S. does what it can to basically allow these military dictatorships to stay in place because they initially are afraid of the rise of communism, and Saddam Hussein, as bad as he is not a communist. And eventually they become extremely worried about radical Islam, which I will talk about in a minute. Of course, what I haven't talked about yet is perhaps the elephant in the room for Mideast relations, and that's the development of the State of Israel. In 1948, the Israelis demand to end the British Mandate of Palestine. In the wake of the Holocaust, or Shoah, and the loss of 6 million lives, the Europeans and the West, and the United States in particular, become extraordinarily sympathetic to Israel having its own nation state so that it will not be oppressed by Europeans anymore. This creates a huge problem with them and the local Arab population, who is immediately displaced, and war ensues in the Arab-Israeli War, the first one that starts May 14th, 1948. This war, the Israelis, despite being outnumbered and surrounded by their enemies, are actually quite successful in sending back a large Arab army that's over 1 million strong. These include Arabs from all over the Arabian Peninsula, but also Jordanians and Egyptians. The Egyptians will eventually come in to help fight the Israelis under Nasser and later a man named Anwar Sadat. And Israel has basically been forced to fight for its very existence on several different occasions. That war, the 6 Days War, and the Yom Kippur War. I'm not talking about the modern wars. I am talking about the earlier wars. So, so what happens next? The creation of a state of Israel leaves a lot of problems. The displacement of the Palestinians and the Arabs in the region leaves hundreds of thousands of refugees who don't necessarily have a place to go. And at the same time, the Jews in other Arabic countries, Mizrahim Jews, are exiled from their lands and kicked out and sent to Israel, which is why to this day there are very few Jews living in any major Muslim country in the Middle East, despite Judaism being a Middle Eastern religion in many, many ways. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. But yes, the British kind of left a power vacuum there, and just like they did with India and Pakistan, the result was war. It's not directly the British's fault. I think the British are just easy to pick on, but obviously the malaise I think is more caused by the British giving the Hashemites Jordan rather than letting the Palestinians settle there. This also creates an apartheid state, not just between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but with a bunch of other Arab states, which have continually been disgusted at the prospect of letting the Palestinians dwell in their lands. The Jordanians, the Lebanese, and the Saudis have been very resistant to the Palestinians living in their territories. When Israel was attacking Rafah in the Hamas war, Egypt sealed its border so that the Palestinians would not be allowed in there. So the Palestinians have not just been bullied by the Israelis, they've been bullied by everyone in that region of the world, even fellow Muslims, even fellow Sunni Muslims, of which most of them are Sunnis. So what happens next? Yes, Mohammed, it did. So in retaliation, hundreds of thousands of Jews were sent out of Arab lands and eventually resettled in Israel. Eventually, a small Arab contingent would settle in Israel and gain full rights and citizenship, and there's 2 million Arabs who live in Israel to this day. That does not help the Palestinians, who continually do not have a state to this day and rely on Israel for much of their infrastructure and existence. So, what happens next? Making some water. It's getting hot. I can't wear the smoking jacket much longer on the live streams, but no, I haven't read that. But thank you, Kaleidoscope, for trying to bring it up other things that are not relevant. What I was going to say is the United States instantly becomes a supporter of Israel because Israel elects a democratic government. The Soviet Union, seeing Israel as an oppressor colonizer who has stolen land, instantly becomes a supporter of the Palestinians and other Arab efforts to undo the state of Israel. So Israel actually becomes a representation in the Muslim mind, in the Middle East at least, of oppression and Western colonialism. And so they are seen as a Western colonizer by many in the Arab-speaking world and in the Muslim world to this day, whereas Israel is seen as a beacon of hope, democracy, and freedom by those in the West who continually support them, which only makes them look more and more like they are a Western imperializer, which makes them look worse to many of the Arabs and Muslims living in the Middle East. So, that is how you get the basic structure of what we have in the Middle East with its modern countries today. There are other countries that are formed at different time periods by different political families, like the United Arab Emirates and stuff like that. And many of them are run by a tribe, leaders of a tribe with extreme amounts of wealth, good connections to the West, and economic opportunities, who basically, through kleptocracy, create strong militaristic-like states that are oppressive of their people, and hate the West ostensibly, but will trade and wheel and deal with them like the Saudis have with British Petroleum for a long time. The Saudis eventually become one of the most predominant oil suppliers in the entire world and regulate it through their organization known as OPEC. In the 1970s, things are going to significantly change for the Middle East. In 1973, Israel is attacked by Jordan. I believe it's Jordan, Egypt, and the Arabs. And this is the third war. The Israelis win this one. And eventually, the Egyptians are defeated in humiliating fashion. And Anwar Sadat, who is the new leader of Egypt, a successor of Nasser, is eventually brought to the table to work with the Israelis by President Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, Menachem Begin, the head of Israel, and Sadat eventually agreed on the Camp David Accords in 1978, which basically says that Egypt will become the first Middle Eastern country to recognize Israel's right to exist, and in exchange, Israel gives back the Sinai Peninsula, which they took in the Six-Day War, to the Egyptians. So the Sinai is still controlled by the Egyptians to this day. Meanwhile, also in 1967, the Israelis took over Gaza from the Egyptians in the Six-Day War, and they took over the Golan Heights and West Bank from the Jordanians. These lands were not originally controlled by the Palestinian natives, but by different Arab and Muslim powers that sheltered them there while having a lot of resentment and hatred towards Israel. So that happens in 1970. So that starts in 1973 and ends in 78. Sadat's reward for this and besides winning the Nobel Prize, is being killed by a radical who believes he's become soft on Israel. Egypt still remains one of the very few countries that is sympathetic to Israel in the Middle East. But this isn't about Israel so much as it is about the entire Middle East. So what else is going on at this time? Continually tense relations between their former allies, the British and the Americans, push the Arabs to start regulating the supply of oil. This leads to the energy crisis of the mid-1970s and an oil embargo by OPEC against the West. So that's going on. So that's going on as well as the Saud family continues with its ups and downs. By the way, there's a bevy of political assassinations, upheavals, and tensions going on throughout the various different parts of the Islamic world at this time. Next, we're going to learn about how Iran becomes what Iran is today, the Islamic Republic. In 1977 and 78, the Shah was continually, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, was becoming more and more unpopular for cracking down more and more on civil liberties, public demonstrations, and protestations. The British, the CIA, and the Americans, and the CIA did everything they could to support his administration, even in murdering and assassinating a former prime minister who had socialist ties. In order to keep Iran from falling into the Soviet sphere, the United States had put up and tolerated a lot, as they did in many other places. The British had also been very interested in British Petroleum continually having a say in Iranian politics and continuing to market off of Iranian oil. This leads to big problems. Um, Basically, three different schools of revolutionaries emerge, much like in the Spanish Civil War 40 years previously. One school is left-wing agitators, many of them highly influenced by socialist and Marxist doctrine, which are being supported by the Soviet Union in an attempt to overthrow the Iranian government. By the way, the Soviet Union did a lot of trying to influence and manipulate and espionage and spying at this time as well. They just didn't have the control that the British and the Americans did. They're going to go into Afghanistan in 1979 to prop up an Islamic government there. And if you consider Afghanistan to be part of the Middle East, well, this is what kind of draws Afghanistan into the Middle Eastern sphere, is the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Also in 1979, you have the Islamic Revolution. You have Marxist and left-wing agitators who are demanding some form of communist government be established. You have liberal Democrats who want to establish a free speech constitutional republic or democracy, who are embracing Republican, lowercase r, initiatives, be they left-wing or moderate. And then you have Muslim agitators. You have radical Muslims, many of them influenced by a former Iranian teacher and scholar, and oh my gosh, the name escapes me. What is the name of an Islamic teacher? A cleric. He's the, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Somebody please tell me, what is the name of an Islamic teacher, an Islamic religious teacher? An imam, thank you. The imam, who eventually will become the head leader of Iran, the supreme religious leader known as the Ayatollah. His name is Khomeini. He is in France, but he is working to influence revolutionary activity by Muslims who believe that Iran is too liberal. So you have leftists who believe it needs to be communist, you have moderates who believe it's too much of a totalitarian state, and you have Muslims who believe that Iran is too politically right-wing, too much like the West. You have a very liberal society by Sharia standards, and Khomeini definitely wants to change that. And so he believes that they have lost their connection to God, and that is why they've been punished by oppression from the British and the Americans. He hates the West. He has no affinity for the West, but he is not a communist. But they team up with the communists and the liberals in order to create revolutionary fervor, protests, riots. The crackdowns of these riots by the Shah leads to public outrage and eventually leads to the U.S. deciding to embrace what they had ostensibly been in favor for. Ever since the First World War or Second World War, depending on where you come, what perspective you have, the United States have been pushing for 60 years the idea of self-determination. The people of a country should be able, through democratic or otherwise acceptable means, to find their own leadership and authority. Woodrow Wilson had first proposed this, and another Democratic president, Jimmy Carter, is going to bring this to Iran. As the Shah, who has been an ally of the United States, is doing what he can to control the growing resistance to his regime, he asks the United States to help him. Jimmy Carter, the U.S. president, decides to pull his support from the Iranian Shah, and this allows a destabilization of power. Eventually, the military turns, and when the military turns as an enemy revolution, the monarchy is finished. The Shah is able to escape Iran and go to New York City, where he is treated for cancer. His family still lives in the United States, by the way, and many Persians and Iranians flee to America this day, and that's why there's actually a large contingent of Persian Americans here. And the reason I'm calling them Persian is they don't consider themselves Iranian, because for them, Iran is the Islamic Revolutionary Republic. Khomeini basically backstabs the communists and turns to Iran, and Iran had been in a Shia, it was the center of Shia Islam. It wasn't going to embrace atheistic communism. It was going to be Islamic in one way, shape, or form. Radical Islam is what they eventually go for. And they embrace that with the rise of Khomeini becoming the Ayatollah in 1979, and the end of the monarchy there. The United States made its first mistake in regime change. If you want to look at U.S. geopolitical interests, the U.S. lost a lot of influence with Iran being sworn to the destruction of not just the little Satan, Israel, who represents the West, but the big Satan in the West, the United States. And Islam and Shia Islam, as well as radical enforcement of Sharia law, has been a problem in Iran ever since, with democracy basically being outlawed and many other repressions of ethnic, religious, and sexual minorities continuing to this day. Um, Meanwhile, Iraq falls under the sway of Saddam Hussein, and with encouragement from the United States, who wants to get back at the Islamic Republic, the U.S. allows Saddam to invade Iran in 1980, and this leads to a decades-long war. The U.S. will end up pulling their support from Saddam, but just keep that in mind. The United States helped a man named Saddam Hussein fight the Iranians because Iran bad. The U.S. has very interesting at how it has a revolving door. It's like rotating sushi with how the U.S. chooses its enemies sometimes. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the Soviets bring Afghanistan into the Middle Eastern sphere, although it was very much not like that in its past, with its invasion of Afghanistan, trying to prop up a pro-communist government in 1979. This leads to a decade of fighting in which the United States, under the very aggressive Cold Warrior, President Ronald Reagan during the 80s, will do everything in their power to undermine the communists. Whether it's buying weapons from their former enemy, Iran, yes, Iran, run by the Khomeinis again, to fund revolutionaries in Nicaragua, the Contras, leading to a scandal called the Iran-Contra scandal, or so giving weapons and support to the Mujahideen, whose one of their faction leaders is a man named Osama bin Laden. Yes, Osama bin Laden, a radical Muslim committed to the destruction of the West, was once supported by the West in order to bring down communism. Very, very fascinating. So, and if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. So regime changes are happening. The turbulence of the 1970s is going to lead to a lot of problems that continue to persist in the Middle East to this day. Obviously, Iran is committed to the destruction of Israel, and that is what is causing the problems today. This is 45 years in the making. The Shah had not been necessarily opposed to the existence of the State of Israel. It had been more of hear no evil, see no evil thing. The normalization of relationships, every time Israel normalizes its relationships with a Muslim country in the Middle East, tensions rise with the remaining Muslim countries that do not feel that way. Which leads to threats from the Syrians and the Assad government and from Saddam Hussein over the years, believe it or not, as the Saudis remain extraordinarily leery of Israel's existence and the U.S. unswerving support for it. Hey, Harry, great to see you. I need to talk to you at the end, by the way. I wanted to run something by you. But my wonderful moderator, Harry, is here. Show some love for him. I got started on time, believe it or not. So we've been going for just over 50 minutes. What happens next? So, and I thought I would have time for Q&A, but this is just, there's so much, and there's so much left to talk about. I've only got 10 minutes. But yeah, what happens next? The Syrians, and make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And yes, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. There's so much, and I haven't done all of it. Evan, you would like learning the first half of the lecture. I'm sure you would really appreciate it. What happens next? So the United States helps gives the Iranians money after supposedly supporting their downfall with Saddam in order to help overthrow the Sandinistas and the communists in Nicaragua under Daniel Ortega. Meanwhile, which by the way, one of the lectures I want to do very soon is Latin America's independence movement. So I'm going to be talking about that very soon on a Sunday. And I'm going to keep putting up polls so you guys can vote and decide what do you want to hear for my live stream lectures. And people voted and they wanted to hear about the Middle East and the Iran-Israel conflict. And so I'm giving you all the background I possibly can, because in order to understand the present, we have to go to the past. That's what history is about. Yeah, the Iran-Iraq war. So what happens next? Eventually the Ayatollah Khomeini dies, but the mullahs continue to rule Iran and rule it to this day. The tension between Iran and radical Shia Islam and Sunni Islam in areas like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and even Syria has caused problems substantially over the last 35 years. The Soviets are defeated in Afghanistan, and the United States looks at Osama bin Laden, hoping that they've made a friend, and he will become very committed to the destruction of the United States and the West. He hates communism, but he hates the West just as much, and he will create Al-Qaeda in order to do that in the 1990s. Let me see. What happens next? Evan, just ask anyone if I've sided with white people, by the way. I've been criticizing the heck out of the United States and their foreign policy in the Middle East, by the way. And I've been talking a lot about how the British and the French extracted resources and created a lot of problems. And I've been explaining exactly why the Middle East hates the West. So you can continue to believe that, because I'm not going to side with everything and say Islam is great all the time, but I'm trying to tell the truth. Yes, tribal fighting is definitely part of the problem. Speaking of tribes, the Alawite tribe was in power in Syria since 1971, and in 2000, with the death of, I think his name was Faisal Assad, his son Bashir comes to the throne. He comes to power in Syria. So you've got Bashir al-Assad in Syria at the beginning of the 2000s. You have Saddam, who's been there for over 20 years. You have the Iranian Republic, and you have the Egyptians with their military dictatorship under Hosni Mubarak, and you have the Afghanis and them being influenced by Al-Qaeda. The Taliban runs the government there, and then the United States just decides to try to destroy all of us in 10 years, and that's what leads to the Afghan war after the 9/11 attacks. Saddam Hussein's continual braggadocious lies, basically, that he has chemical weapons and will use them on his own people, sends the U.S. there, basically believing the lie or touting the lie, whatever you want to say about that. And so the U.S. engages in 2 more regime changes, taking out the Taliban in Afghanistan, a tribal mountainous area with very much different people who know how to fight guerrilla wars and have done it against the British and the Russians and the Soviets, so they don't have a problem doing it against the Americans, which eventually leads to the U.S. losing that war in tragedy after 20 years. And you've also got the U.S. involved in Iraq, which that also ends badly, because the Iraqis are not open to democracy. The idea of exporting democracy may be one of the dumbest moves in American political history. It's a huge foreign policy blunder which only destabilizes the Middle East. It leads to the collapse of hated and hated and oppressive totalitarian and authoritarian regimes. But the vacuum of political power that has entered in has created problems such as the rise of ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and everything they have done. Meanwhile, Muslims on the ground suffer immensely, either through the attacks of the United States or through radical Islamic terrorism, which sees them as a problem because they are not radical enough. In 2005, the Israelis turn over Gaza to the running of the Palestinians, who elect Hamas, which is a terrorist organization committed to the destruction of Israel, as their leadership. The Palestinian Authority takes over the West Bank and starts to organize that area. And again, 2004, you have the fall of Iraq, and Saddam Hussein is put in prison. Eventually, he is tortured, he is interrogated, and he is eventually killed and executed for crimes against humanity. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died just so that he could be thrown out of power and the area could become a complete vacuum of political and religious infighting. And by the way, the Kurds also never got their own state in this land either. So I'm summing it up quickly because I don't have a huge amount of time, and I've done a live stream lecture about the war on terror before. But basically, you've seen, hopefully you've been able to see, as I've charted through this, how the modern Middle East actually became the modern Middle East and what it actually looks like, from the loss and fall of the Ottoman Empire to the mandates of the Europeans, to the post-colonial relationships, to the United States initiating regime changes that have only hurt its geopolitical position. Things have become destabilized, and in the face of instability, powerful strongmen have risen to power, both radical and less radical, but all the time oppressive. And that is what you see with Bashir Assad. That's what you see with Saddam Hussein. The last chapter, really, in modern understanding this, is the Arab Spring of 2011, where regime changes saw the Egyptian government topple for a second, thanks to the efforts of CAIR and the Muslim Brotherhood, only to be restored with a new military government that runs Egypt to this day. The Libyans overthrow and kill Gaddafi, which creates a refugee crisis. By the way, all of these wars, all of these infightings, all of these destabilizations have led to massive refugee crises. In 2014, a revolution begins in Syria that eventually wins. December of last year, they finally unseated Bashir al-Assad, and he fled to Russia to his good friend Vladimir Putin. And the Syrian and the use of chemical weapons, the fleeing of the Syrian people creates a refugee crisis, much like the Armenians fleeing into the Syrian desert a century before. And some of the biggest refugee crises that the West is having to deal with are partially self-inflicted and also the result of total unrest and the falls of dictatorships in the Middle East like Saddam, Gaddafi, and Assad. So, what else can I discuss? What else can I talk about? In 2020, the Abraham Accords are signed, in which Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and some other smaller entities recognize and normalize relationships with Israel. Israel's continual aggression in the Middle Eastern region and Benjamin Netanyahu's commitment to basically wiping the Palestinians away and not giving them anything, let alone a chance of their own state, has only worsened the chances of an actual possible two-state solution being created. It's created newfound tensions, and those saw themselves explode last Friday with Israel attacking Iran right before the U.S. was set to create middleman negotiations with Iran. The big issue about Iran over the last 15 to 20 years has been the enriching and the usage of uranium to create a nuclear weapon. Israel does not ostensibly have nuclear weapons, but has clearly been given them the proper technology by the West to have them and use them for their self-defense. At the same time, Iran has been enriching uranium like crazy, and this has made many people in the West very worried of them creating having a nuclear weapon that they could use on the West at any time. Nobody trusts them to follow the recommendations of their treaty that they signed with the West earlier, following IAEA regulations for using uranium and other things, not for enrichment of military sources, but for energy and power and things like that, like nuclear power, for instance. So basically, and we just hit the 60-minute mark. That's basically where it stands. The Iranian Republic, basically to sum up the whole thing with where we are right now, the Iranian Republic, ever since its creation, has been committed to the destruction of Israel, which they see as a representation of the West. And in some ways, they have a reason to do that. Not to destroy them, but to see them as a representation of the West. Israel's continual war against Hamas and the Gazans has led to many people decrying human rights abuses and war crimes, while many of the Middle Eastern governments have shown some newfound openness to the West and to Israel for economic ties if the Palestinians will be allowed to have their own second state. Taliban was kicked out of power in 2001, only to return to power in 2021. That's what's going on there. The new Syrian government has showed some openness to work with President Trump, which will be quite interesting to see, despite executing many members of the Alawite tribe and Jews and Christians in Syria. The Turkish government has been run by Erdogan for about 20 years now, and he's basically passed over being a president and become the dictator of that region. The Hashemites are still in control of Jordan. Hezbollah has emerged as one, and there have been multiple Hezbollahs, multiple Mujahideens. These are different Islamic words to connote different forms of struggle and fighting, which is the struggle, jihad, that's where the word comes from. And they have Hezbollah, the most modern, there was a Hezbollah in Iran fighting in the Iranian Revolution, by the way, but the most recent form of Hezbollah has been a Shia-backed militia that has been extraordinarily influential in Lebanon over the last 20 years, also wanting destruction to the West and to Israel. So those are a few things there. The Saudis still run Saudi Arabia, and interestingly enough, despite them being very much, you could argue, an oppressive totalitarian state, although I wouldn't say they're fully like that, but oppressive in some ways to be sure, that family is still in power, and that land is generally stable compared to Syria, which lost its monarchical power on the Assads, Saddam Hussein being thrown out of Iraq. Regime changes have led to problems, whether it's in Iran, Iraq, Syria, Libya, or Afghanistan. Saudi Arabia has not gone through a regime change, is still being run by the same family who the British gave it to 93 years ago, and has some levels of stability and is probably considered the most prosperous and powerful of the Middle Eastern world. Many people believe that if Saudi Arabia were to normalize its relations with Israel and join the Abraham Accords, a huge, huge project of the Biden administration before October 7th, then 2023 when Hamas attacked Israel, then they would join, then Iran would be cornered by the largest Muslim entity in that area, turning on them and normalizing relations with Israel, which would make it almost impossible for them to destroy Israel. You can see that Israel is a linchpin, for good or for bad, in that area of the world. I will say this, and people are not going to like this. If the Israelis did not exist, and there were no Israelis in the area, and Israel was not existing, and Palestine was its own independent Islamic Republic, there would still be fighting and problems, because you have a Shia-Sunni situation, you have the Kurds, you have the Sufis, you have different groups that continue to struggle against each other. So you also can see how European colonialism has its problems by dividing up these lands after the fall of the Ottomans, who were no picnic themselves. You have destabilization, and you have different tribal areas trying to figure out who their leader is, and strongmen have often risen to the top with Saddam or Assad or the Shah of Iran and things like that. So, yes, so So the point of the matter is, it's not all. Hopefully, this has been a fair contingency. On the one end, the West has shaken up a lot, and I think the worst shakeup has been the recent regime changes, not necessarily even the carving up of that area originally. On the other end, Muslims fighting each other is par for the course with Islamic history, and on the third hand, the existence of Israel continues to be a beacon of hatred for many, many Muslims in the Middle East. So, the yeah. Evan, if Muslims love each other, how do the Sunnis and Shiites get along? Why does Iran hate Saudi Arabia? What is 12 Shia Islam? What do you know anything about the gunpowder empires and how they fought against each other? Clearly, you do not. Um, yes. So, anyways, sorry, Evan just likes to come in here and just say Islam has almost never done anything wrong, and it's a beautiful thing, and in many ways it is. But I'm sorry, it's relevant to what I'm talking about. That's historical ignorance to lionize one religion. I don't lionize any religion. I don't lionize any country. I talk about what these countries have done and how that has affected geopolitics from a historical perspective. If you didn't know what the Middle East, how the Middle East got to be where it is, now I think you have a much clearer picture. And hopefully, I've been very honest and fair and objective in my assessments of the region. There, really, the interesting thing is that if the Middle East had been left alone 50 years ago, things might be a lot better right now. If the Shah of Iran was not overthrown, if there wouldn't have been the development of Iran, and you were out of the frying pan and into the fire with that one. There are many problems. ISIS is worse than Saddam in some ways. So the oppression of the peoples of those lands by their dictators was absolutely awful. But excuse me, that doesn't make it the job of the United States or Israel to do everything it can to destabilize those areas and replace them with leaders they think will be effective. The Middle East has not proven itself to be a democratic safe haven. And you know what? That's totally okay. How has democracy necessarily proven itself to be the end-all be-all? Maybe it's the end-all be-all for Europeans and Westerners in the United States, but that doesn't mean that it works in Asia or Southwestern Asia, aka the Middle East. The truth of the matter is we don't know exactly what this is going to look like because a lot of these things are still unfolding, and a century is really a short amount of time to judge a civilization that has existed in various ways and forms for 6,000 years, where even Islam itself is a relative newcomer to the story of the Middle East and its people and what the Near East has been and been before. The Judaic kingdom existed 1,600 years before the Middle East. Lebanon existed before Islam. Lebanon existed 1,600 years before the Middle East. Egypt existed 4,000 years before that. So these areas are not just what the modern incantations of what the West sees them as because of how the West is looking at things. The United States is a peon compared to all of these different civilizations and societies in the Middle East, including the Jews or the Arabs or the Egyptians or the Afghans. The United States is a relatively new country, although I will say the Afghans didn't have their own country until 1747. Go to my Substack and read my master's thesis about the Great Game to learn more about Afghan history. And check out my long-form video about the incredible history of the founding of Islam there. So hopefully that was informative and you learned a little bit about something and learned how the Middle East has gotten to where it's been and why that's and the problems that are compared with that, and the progress that's being made, and the strongmen that are there, and the strongmen that were, and the strongmen that are, and the strongmen that are on their way. So, again, if you enjoy this, like and subscribe, and become a friendly neighborhood historian. I will stay around, read the chat, and catch up a little bit, and maybe answer a few questions. But we went over an hour, and it was worth it. I really love talking about this topic with you guys. I really hope you enjoyed it, and you learned something. And again, I hope I was as fair and objective as possible, because people are always telling me that I'm not. So it's fun to hear when somebody says, yes, you're doing a good job, even if I'm wrong about certain things. Make sure to fact check me. Don't just go off of what I say. Am I a historian? Am I well educated? Absolutely. Do I look great in the smoking jacket? Even more absolutely. But that doesn't mean I'm right about everything. Trust but verify. Jay doesn't mean it in that. So yes, it does. Saladin took Palestine from you. He didn't take Palestine from me. I don't have anything to do with Palestine. Sorry. And they didn't call it Palestine. They called it the Holy Land. And he took it from the Christians. So he stole it. So he's a colonizer by your logic. So there you go. Yeah. And that's true, Kaleidoscope. Richard left because Philip II abandoned him after he conquered Cyprus and Acre. Why did the Crusaders take Acre? It's only because of Richard the Lionheart. In fact, the Muslims called him the Lionheart because he was such a great commander. If you want to know more about it, go and check out my long-form video about the Angevin Empire or my series on the English kings, where I talk about Richard the Lionheart and how the Muslims were fearful of him. They were also fearful of a man with leprosy named Baldwin IV, and it was only after he died that Saladin was able to take back Jerusalem. And Saladin was a Kurd. He was actually I think he was Egyptian. Yeah, let me see here. Yeah, 4 times attacking Egyptian Ayyubid dynasty in 400 years still lose. Ayyubids were pretty impressive, but then they got overthrown by the Mamluks. Oh, by the way, something that I probably should have mentioned in discussing the Near East and the Middle East is that Islam, of these different caliphates or states, are all being replaced by each other. The Ayyubids replaced the Seljuks, who were Turks, the first Turks. Turkey wasn't actually Turkish until like the 11th century, by the way. The Ayyubids replaced them. The Mamluks replaced them. The Ottomans replaced the Ilkhanate, which were the Mongols who conquered Persia. The Safavids replaced the Timurid Empire. These are all Muslim kingdoms, empires, and caliphates that were all replaced by one another. The Umayyads took over Spain, but then were thrown out by the Abbasids, who the Umayyads had defeated the Rushtuns and Ali's son, who wanted to rule as a dictator, basically. Yes, I know exactly who Saladin was. He was a Sunni. What's my solution? Sharon, that's a good question. I don't know. I think leaving the middle, as a Westerner, my message to the West would be leave the Middle East to itself, to its own devices. And I'm only saying that not because of political aspirations or ideas or any of that stuff. Saladin never defeated Richard. Very true. Richard's a great ruler, great warrior. Terrible ruler, though, Harry. But Sharon, the truth of the matter, if you're still here, and I hope you're listening, and I hope everyone else is listening, my solution is based off of all the historical evidence that I have gathered, and I am speaking as a Westerner on behalf of what the West could do. The West needs to butt out. It's that simple. You can have the oil, you can intervene, you can work on behalf of your own country or these certain prospects, but constant warfare in that region has done no one a lick of good. Okay, that may enrich your military contractors, but it doesn't enrich the American people, or the British or the French or anyone for that matter. You had your time there. You've done your thing. Continual trade, negotiations, talks, peace talks, whatever you want to do, that's fine. Nuclear disarmament, great, go for it. The United States is good at that kind of stuff. The West is good at that kind of stuff. But regime change and playing kingmaker doesn't necessarily work. The United States isn't the man who would be king, it's the land that would be king. And that needs to stop. And Harry, I think you could appreciate that too. Kurds, yeah. Tell someone there are Christian Kurds, by the way. The Kurds are not necessarily all Muslim. But tell a Sunni Muslim in Iraq that the Kurds are Muslims. Tell them that a Shia is Muslims. It's not the same thing. I like how you're basing everything off of a movie by Ridley Scott, who I think he's British or something. It doesn't matter. He doesn't know the history. Richard III was captured. That's you're thinking of Richard III in England. That was Bosworth Field. He was killed. Yes. So, and what happened during the past week in the Iran-Israel war? Steve, the truth of the matter is, and you're the one that mentioned the topic, and that's why I wanted to focus on the Iran-Israel thing, because you really wanted to go over that. And I need to learn more about Yemen and Oman to talk about them a little bit more. But obviously the Yemenites and the Saudis have had their problems recently with the Houthis and that militia being basically half pirates, half terrorist organization. At least that's how the West would see it. But the truth of the matter is, if Israel wants to do that to Iran because they're worried about this and that, that's fine. Should the West continually just start another war because another country is dangerous? Look at what happened in Iraq. If we don't learn from history, we're bound to repeat it. And this isn't ancient history. This is contemporary history. This is only 20 years ago that the U.S. made the mistakes it did in Iraq. So, yeah. And before Richard left, he got full access for Jerusalem. Yeah, Richard basically won the crusade, but got the full access. The assaults on Christians going into the holy sites in Jerusalem was stopped, which was an issue why the First Crusade even began. Evan, you may not like this, but the First Crusade began because the Muslims were assaulting Christians when they were going into Jerusalem, the Seljuk Turks. They were taking land from the Byzantines. They were stealing land because they were colonizers, because apparently only white men can colonize. But if you're going to apply those standards, then the Dome of Iraq and Al-Aqsa are signs of colonization. I don't actually believe that, but if you're going to go by this standard that the West is the only ones that can colonize, apply the lens and standards and objectives to your own area. Yes, Richard did a lot, was an excellent general, just a terrible king. Thank you, Jay, I appreciate that. Yeah, he got captured by the Holy Roman Emperor, and then no, he got and then was turned over. Yeah, it kind of sucked for him after that. May I ask, what do you believe about October 7th, and why do you believe what you believe about it? Watching videos, evidence, reading both sides of it, I mean, no matter where you are on it, it's really hard to argue that October 7th didn't happen the way it happened. I'm sorry, Mohammed, but Hamas perpetrated an attack in Israel on several different sites. The Nova Music Festival was the most bounteous, where they kidnapped hundreds of people and killed 1,200. Does that make it justified to kill 50,000 people? No. I never would argue, as someone who believes that any nation has the right to defend itself, the Palestinians or the Israelis. I've never made the argument in any of my defenses of Israel's going to war with Gaza that it is a proportional comparison. I hate it when people say, oh, they stole 1,200, they stole 200 people, and they killed 1,200, and I'm like, well, you've killed 40,000, so stop it. Can we trust Hamas and Gaza with the numbers? No, but it's pretty obvious. It's many more people. That's why I keep saying the war needs to end immediately. So, and although Richard, and I know I have a Western lens to that, but I'm trying to understand it from the Muslim perspective. I'm doing my absolute best to do that, and I understand that there's suffering in Gaza, and the suffering in Gaza is Hamas using them as human shields, the Israelis attacking them, and the other Middle Easterners not giving a fig about them, unfortunately. It's very easy to criticize just one, but you have to be able to criticize all of them. And it's true. The Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Lebanese have been playing hot potato with the Palestinians for a long time. That's why there's discrimination against them. That's why they can't be citizens in Lebanon or Jordan. So, if capitalism of the federal government of the U.S. didn't get greedy, socialism would have blossomed and slowed down how trickle-up works and how the Stanford experiment is real and is our downfall. No. Did Hitler even get to bring back Russia soil from Russia? He tried, it didn't work. No, the Jews do not run America. And no, they're not telling me to say that. Saladin is the Western name of Saladin Yusuf ibn Ayyub, the son of Ayyub. Yes, I know what ibn means. Yes, he was the Muslim Sultan of Egypt and Syria, he who famously defeated the massive army of the Crusaders in the Battle of Piton and captured Jerusalem. Yes, absolutely. I know who Saladin is. Stop using ChatGPT to get your answers. Yes. Yes, your God defeated their God, even though you say your God is the same God as your God. So I don't understand that. If the God of Muslims is the God of Christians, and conversely this works both ways, then whose God was fighting against who during the Crusades? Just saying. You are not favored. See, that's racism. And they were based in Egypt because Saladin was an Egyptian who rose to the ranks of being one of the greatest generals in Muslim history. In fact, probably the greatest, most underrated general in human history is Saladin, if you want to say his name correctly. Watch my video on the Crusades. I show plenty of criticism to the Christians, and I show plenty of support for Saladin. Because I try to be as objective as possible. And being objective means criticize and compliment at the same time. Yeah. Actually, I don't think so. I think what I just heard, Evan, is that Iran wants a ceasefire. And if the Israelis had let the United States get involved, maybe that would have happened. So, yes. Let me see. Yes, Kaleidoscope, I agree with you there. And White Widow, I'm glad you enjoyed the subject. The only reason Richard left was because he got ill. Yeah, but also the French pulled back their support. Richard was fighting with a small deck of soldiers compared to Saladin and continually beat him. That's why they called him the Lion-Hearted. He was brave. He went into action. There's a reason people have lionized, no pun intended, Richard of England, because he was actually a really great commander and did more with half of what Napoleon did in some ways. Richard's definitely up there as one of the best commanders, and Saladin is too. Can you talk a little bit about Black September? Jordanian-Palestinian relations are so interesting. Seems to me Palestinians have been running around causing trouble for decades. It's not fully that they're just running around causing trouble. They've become a bane of the existence of not just the Israelis, but of many people in the Middle East. And I feel sorry for them in many ways because they don't have anywhere to go. So when Netanyahu says we have nowhere to go, that's true. So do they. So in the end, Saladin won because he was a good Muslim and we always win. Yes, like in India or in Spain, or in North Africa, Muslims don't always win, except when they kick out people. So if I get, and it's funny, I'm not, Evan, you're arguing with a ghost. no one is saying here, although maybe some of you think this, Christians should just beat Muslims and Christians always win. I haven't said that. You don't even know what religion I am. You don't even, I mean, I've admitted that I believe that there's a God, but I don't say anything about which God I think that is. I might be a Muslim for all you know. I have great respect for Islam. I find Islam to be fascinating in many ways. And if you actually go back and watch the first part of this, criticize people who criticize Islam just because of radical extremists who have misunderstood Wahhabism and Sharia. Yes, Harry, that's a good one. You win by being a refugee in Europe. Will the Jews take over your country? Jeez. Wow. Why did Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the Turks. What do you mean get the works? I don't know. Are you talking about being renamed? The Ottomans' military genius stemmed from its strong organization. See, that's a ChatGPT quote. It's a true quote. And you know what would be great? If you go watch my video on the Safavids and you actually see how I talk about the Ottomans, I have nothing but respect for the Ottomans when it comes to military advances and stuff like that. So let me see here. Getting away from that, the Ottoman Empire, yeah. The Ottoman Empire is gone, destroyed by the British together with the Arabs. That's true. And Kaleidoscope for listening to the early part of the lecture, so you heard me talk about how the British used the Arabs to take apart the Ottomans. It's actually pretty interesting, too. Have you heard about Air India flight crash? If yes, what are your opinions? It's awful. Just this week of news has just been terrible. You have the riots, you have the protests, you have the No Kings thing, you have the military parade, you have the U.S. senator being detained, you've got all of these other stuff. You have Israel attacking Iran, you still have the war in Ukraine, by the way, in case you haven't forgotten, and then just this crash of the Air India plane killing 240 people. Just terrible. Islam and Christianity have many differences, but the Latin Church and Islam seek diplomatic relations, educational diffusion, and theological arguments to learn from each other, which is what I'm happy to do from a historical perspective. Corso's being anti-Islamic? Yes. I find that I'm not going to ban him because, I mean, you're just telling me you've been anti-white plenty, so. That's true, Kaleidoscope. No Janissaries, no army. No Christian boys they were stealing and then mutilating, yes. Who sometimes went into it of their own free will, or their parents made them do it. Let me see. Ed Friendly, please help me explain that Saladin never defeated Richard and Richard. They made a treaty. They made the first ever treaty between a Muslim and Christian commander. I forget the name of the treaty, but it was Saladin and Richard, I think 1191, and they agreed to stop fighting. Saladin let the the Christians go to Jerusalem. The Crusader states of Tripoli and Antioch were assured, and Richard got to go home. But Harry, let me see here. Let me see. I wanted to talk to you about something, and people aren't used to Muslims talking back. People got too used to Muslims allowing insults. What? Did you just say that? I'm sorry, I don't mean to just disagree with you about everything, Evan, but South Park puts Jesus in a bunch of their episodes and mocks him and makes fun of him, and nobody says anything. They can't put the picture of Muhammad there. Look what happened to Charlie Hebdo because of that. Muslims allow insults? Maybe some of them do, but certainly not from what I've seen in my life. Oh my goodness. Ah, jeez. Anyways. Jeez. I'm sorry. I've been here, I've been answering questions, and I know you guys have interesting stuff to talk about, and I just want to give you a little bit of a bonus Q&A, and I really appreciate everybody listening. But when somebody tells me that Muslims are been putting up with too many insults, I'm sorry, I just have to start laughing. In essence, the First Crusade was a complex event. Stop quoting ChatGPT. Watch my video on the Crusades. It's not as complex as you think. I know exactly why it happened and what happened during it, and I know about the slaughter of Jerusalem because I know you're going to bring that up. Yes, the Christians did terrible things in Jerusalem and to the Jews. No one's arguing that. Yeah. My family fled Armenia during the Armenian genocide at the hands of the Ottoman Turks in the early 20th century. When you would like my video about the Armenian genocide, Julian, please go check that out. And I talked about it on a live stream lecture. I talked about it earlier today. What the Ottoman Turks did, not just to the Armenians, but to the Assyrians, and I really have to thank, I think it was Pradlitsky or one of my followers who gave me information on the Assyrian genocide that had helped me do this live stream lecture today. I couldn't have done it without them, just like I couldn't have done last week's live stream lecture without Harry. And I can't do this channel without you. And we've been going over 20 minutes just to talk about history is for you guys because I enjoy talking to you so much. So liking, subscribing, joining, donating, helping us become more is what we need. So thank you for sharing that, Julian. I'm trying to catch up with the chat so we can wrap it up. Yeah. Yes, I am a Zion. Yes, I am clearly a Zionist, the guy who just criticized Netanyahu. Yes, clear Zionist, very Zionist of me. There was a lot of suffering in Gaza before October 7th. That's why October 7th happened. There was a lot of suffering in Gaza, but that doesn't mean that October 7th is justified. It can't be the same God considering Christians believe the Trinity. Muslims say, and it's a Muslim idea, that Jews, Christians, and Muslims worship the same God. So either you believe that and God was just taking a break during the Crusades, or you don't. And there's plenty of Christians and Jews who say that too, who believe that they all worship the same God. I see the same problems you do, chemistry, by the way. I don't think you did a bad analysis, but you omitted some key things which may make you look slightly less fair. For example, the UN just handed over nearly half of Palestine to the present Jews. Yes, that is true. But that wasn't a Palestinian state. That was after they lost the state that they were going to get. Why were the areas that are Palestinian why were they administered by the non-Palestinians, by the Egyptians and the Jordanians? Why weren't they administered by the Palestinians directly? Why did the Palestinians never had Gaza? They got Gaza because Israel gave it to them in 2005. Why? Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead. I'm just ignoring certain quotes. Kaleidoscope, you've made a friend today. What you're saying is just hilarious to me. Let me see here. Netanyahu belongs in. Yep, and you know what I think would be good? Get rid of Hamas, get rid of Netanyahu, get rid of Abbas. Reform the entire political system, set up some sort of two-state solution. No more terrorism. That works. Okay, I'm just going through the chat now because, yeah, Napoleon is the best general. Let me see here. Yes, I agree with you. If history offends you, you're in the wrong place. I love that quote. Yeah, I'm just ignoring quotes now because I'm tired and I'm trying to move on. Otak, great to see you, by the way. I'm from America, but I'm trying my best to talk about the Middle East today. Didn't the Christians have access to Jerusalem when the Muslims controlled it? Example, during Umar's time? Yes, they did. They do have access, but they were being attacked and raided and stolen from by the Seljuks and then again, and that's what Richard put an end to. So, and yes, like the live, subscribe for more. Islam wants everyone to believe it. Okay, my First Amendment speech allows me to say Muhammad. Oh, jeez. Careful, Kaleidoscope. I love Pakistan. I love studying about India and the Indian subcontinent just a lot. By the way, India's name comes from the Pakistani river, the Indus. Let me see here. Boy, I am way behind on the chat, so I'm just going to catch up. All right, I'm sorry, guys. I can't answer everything you're asking, and that's because people have been spamming, and a lot of stuff have been. People have been talking about a lot of interesting stuff. Yes. So let me see here. Muslims will never make peace with the Jews. It's not impossible. I should have added Jews have only owned 5% of Palestinian land at the time, and things weren't going anywhere for them. Then suddenly the UN just handed so much of the land. They won it in a war. The UN said they had a right to that land because every agreement. So two things here. One, every treaty for land, the Palestinians rejected. The Arabs rejected every agreement for land, even when Ben Gurion offered them 87% of the land. That's true. Here's another truth. The Palestinians had aided, the Mufti had aided, the Arabs had aided the Nazis. So there was a lot of lack of trust, and there was a lot of colonialism, and there was a lot of imperialism, and there was a lot of racism, no doubt about it. The UN has done a lot of nasty stuff, and that's definitely some of it. So, Mohammed, I don't disagree with you, but is that really Israel's fault? Is it not the UN's fault? I'm more interested in what Muhammad's saying because he's actually being fair about it. But yes. Thank you for your prayers, FNN. You will be in mine. I appreciate that. Salam to you. And salam to everyone else who has joined us to talk about Islamic history in the Middle East. And Muhammad, you can verify what I've said and see if it's actually true or not, and no worries. If I am incorrect, please correct me about that. Thank you for sharing your perspective and helping me become better at this and know more about it. So I appreciate that. And Shrukin, great to see you. We're going to be signing off right now. We've gone 28 minutes now. So yeah. Yeah. Yes. Evan, stop with the hate comments. There's only one Christ, Muhammad is dead, while Jesus is alive. That's the Christian perspective. So God bless you. I said salam to the Muslim, God bless you to the Christian. There you go. Harry, I want to make a video about the British Empire and its decline. Maybe even one about its rise and one about its decline, like History Matters does. Well, how would you feel about maybe potentially doing the script on that, or collaborating with me on some way, shape, or form, even helping me make the video, something like that? It could be our joint video. I'm just throwing it out there, Harry, because you've mentioned, we talked about it last week, and I wanted to mention it to you. Well, I could still talk to you this weekend. So think about that, Harry, and let me know what you think in the chat. But yeah, everybody, I'm going to sign off in a minute. Thank you so much for joining us and for all the fun, entertaining stuff that you got to enjoy. I got to learn some stuff, so thank you for helping me learn things. Moto, it's great to see you, and I like the Mughal Empire. Yes. Do you think salam will help his case? Doesn't that mean peace? I would like peace in the chat. I would like salam or shalom or whatever you want to call it in the chat. Pace. Lots of pace in the chat. Yeah. But isn't it a bit irresponsible to say the West should just back out and watch at this point? Unless you really, I don't know if the West can fix it, Sharon. That's the truth. I just don't know if the West can actually fix it because they haven't been able to. They've been trying to, but it hasn't worked. Yes. So Harry, please let me know what you think about that. Maybe you can email me about it or hit me up on Substack about it. Thank you, FNN. I really appreciate that. Yes, Aurangzeb was pretty bad, and his sons fighting afterwards. That guy did not know how to pick an heir, but I do like Akbar the Great and Babur. Literally descended from Genghis Khan. Yeah, Genghis Khan. Yes, Muhammad. Check out my Substack. I've got a lot of perspectives there. It's all of it's on my YouTube channel. So go to the YouTube channel. You can check out my X, my Instagram, my Facebook, my Substack, where you can read my articles, my Patreon for bonus content. And I do these live streams every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and my Q&As, where you can ask me anything about history, Fridays and Saturdays at 6 and the Eastern, and then long form videos Mondays and Fridays. And go check out my video on Father's Day. Have a great day with all of your fathers. Can do the script and then email it to you on the friendly, and then you can make it make sense and check it. That's okay with you. Yeah, but yeah, I'd be happy to collab with you in some way, shape, or form on that, Harry. Maybe email me about it and we can go back and forth, because I want to bring you in, because I know you know your stuff about the British Empire, and I want to make sure I know a lot, but I want to make sure I don't overlook anything that you would think is important as a Brit. So thank you for that, Harry. And Moto, I don't know the greeting for Hindus. Sorry, I'm sorry, Moto, but that's yeah. I'm not defending the Mongols. I don't like the Mongols necessarily. I wouldn't have done well with the Mongols. So anyways, all right, Evan, that's hateful. All the hate you just accused us of, that's hateful, and that is, and let me see, that is a timeout. There you go. I leave you all with that. So hopefully you enjoyed that little last part of it. Like and subscribe. Thank you so much, Harry. Really appreciate it, and we'll correspond and figure that out this week. Take care. Have a great week. I'll see you again on the live streams next weekend, and make sure to go watch those long-form videos and the shorts I have every day here on the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we bring you history in an amicable, neighborly way every day. So, oh, okay, you were. Oh, but still, Mongols, interesting. It's complex. Moto, go back and watch rest of it. It's great to see you again. I hope you will check in with us at some time. Yes, I got rid of him personally, because when you're accusing people of being hateful and then you start insulting another religion and another race, that's hypocrisy. And I can stand people being rude. I can't stand hypocrisy. So, all right. Have a nice day to you, Kaleidoscope. Rest in peace, Brian Wilson. Go check out my video on that. Take care, Martin. It was great to see you. Have a great week, everyone. And remember, love